Hello friends. So in last couple of sessions we have seen how to write a scalar valued function, how to write a table valued function in SQL Server, and then how to build a stored procedure for a particular business logic. Now when we are writing T-SQL batches for a stored procedure, we know uh, the tables that we'll be working with, and then we try to perform some amount of DML or some logic we try to implement on in the stored procedure. Now the question is, what if the table that we are working with is something which needs to be decided at the runtime by SQL Server, by which I mean it needs to be dynamic. In that case, we cannot write a predefined T-SQL code. We would need dynamic SQL to be able to execute that piece of code. So in that case, uh, we'll have to use exec or ESP underscore execute SQL, which are the dynamic SQL codes. So here in this session, we'll try to look at the dynamic SQL. How do we write dynamic SQL statements, and how the way it functions. So let's consider a very simple example. Uh, let's try to select out the tables that exist in this database that we are working currently. If you look at the tables we have, these are the tables that are currently housed in this database, and these are the schema. So it is not just the default schema that we have, but we also have a production or a custom schema. Apart from that, the point to note is it's not just the table type, which is the base table, but we also have a view stationed in this database. Now let's try to look at a very simple requirement. The requirement is I would like to know each of the tables which are user defined tables, and the counts or the number of record counts in each of the table that we currently uh, you know keeping in our database. So and this script should be flexible enough to run on any database that we are working with. So in that case, the table names, the schema, uh, becomes a dynamic one. So we would need to consider these considerations to be able to simply do a count one of select count one from table name, because the table name will vary at the runtime and also the schema will vary at the runtime. So let's try to work up with a code using and learn how to write dynamic SQL codes. So we start with, we would build the string here. So we declare a variable of count, we declare a schema name type, and then we declare a table name, and then we assign a value to it. So let's say select minimum of table name from information schema tables, where table type would be base table, as we had seen. So we need only the base tables and not the views. And then we start table name is not null. We perform and right, and then we select the schema of the table. Table schema, let's rectify this. Table schema, information schema dot tables, where table name, let's bring this down, table name is equal to, sorry, table name, right. So we select the schema and then we set our SQL string. SQL string is equal to, this is the string that will be executed. Select count of 1 from we'll say table schema, and we'll say dot, and then we will say table name. If you look at these two variables will be loaded and the SQL string will be built dynamically. Now to get the count or record the count, we assign this to a variable and then we use exec SQL string, exec SQL string, and we use sp underscore execute SQL. So this is the first, the sp underscore execute SQL is the command to execute any dynamic SQL. The first is the SQL string which will be executed. The next is the parameter. We declare a parameter record count int type and we'll say output. See, this is the parameter that will have a scope within the SQL string. Now just remember one thing: when we declare a dynamic SQL, that when the dynamic SQL executes, it has its own scope. It is not it doesn't have or follow the scope of the stored procedure or the batch which is being currently executed. So any variable outside or in the batch cannot be accessed by the dynamic SQL, and vice versa is also not true. So we need to declare a variable in the dynamic SQL, and then which is how which we have declared here, and then we need to pass on this value. To pass on this value, it is done like this. We need to map this value to an external value. So if you can see, the count value was declared in the batch here, and this is going to map to the record count value which will be declared and executed at the runtime by the dynamic SQL. So this is and then we have to say as output, because this is the output. In case you do not have any output, you can execute the SQL just by closing your statement with SQL string. That's it. So now we do this and we use print command to simply print the table. We simply say okay, table schema plus we say dot table name has, then we say cast the value of the count. Okay, since this is a string, we need to cast the value of, let's process to 100 if we get a greater count. Let's add a space here. That's it. And next what we do is table name is, we get to the next value. So um, information schema dot table type is equal to base table, and table name is, we'll go with the next value. Right, so this forms our while loop. Now let's try to run this. Right, so this is the result. If you've seen it, it has all the table values, the counts of the table. So it brings out the table has 2 records. Okay, I think I need to add one more space. Right, has 2 records, so it brings out the data something like this for us. So this is when we are using execute SQL, sp underscore execute SQL, which brings out these values for us, and it can also the parameters help us to hold the values and then pass it on to the value. Next, we'll see one more interesting way of doing using the exec command, and then we'll see the difference. So we copy the same code, before doing so let me create a table. And let's call this table as counts. Okay, we have 2 columns in this table name, which is sys name, primary key, trusted, and then we have let's call it table count. Right, so we have this, let's declare this we have created this new table, and now let's set this SQL string. We'll use exec command now instead of uh, the sp underscore execute SQL, and we'll see what is the difference here. So we change this and we say, before we try to build this SQL string. Now let's try to build this SQL string. Saying insert into dbo.table counts. Select, and then we say table schema dot table name as table name, comma, count of 1 as table count from table name. Next, let's try to print this first. I will print SQL string, and then we say, now when we have something in codes, like we have this value which needs to be entered or inserted, uh, since exec cannot return us any, remember exec cannot return us any record as a parameter, like we cannot return a count. So in this scenario, when we just have a execute SQL command, it will be executed, instead of execute SQL, we are using the exec command to execute this SQL dynamically. You can actually, before executing it, you can just print it and see how it comes out to be. So right, so this is the command which will be executed for each of the tables, if you look at. Right, now let's just try to run this. We comment out the print and then we execute. Right, so we have executed and inserted records. So let's try to check the table. This was the name, table counts. Okay, now if you look at this table, the table name and counts of each of them are inserted into this table. Now the first thing was, when you are using exec, you cannot have any parameters returned, it will be created. Now which one is better? Exec was an erstwhile command, execute SQL is the new one, but yet I would advise you always use execute SQL whenever you are trying to build and execute a dynamic SQL query. The reasons are twofold. The first thing is SQL injection would not happen, because in execute SQL we have explicit parameters declared and passed on. The second thing is the query plan or the query cache. Whenever we try to execute the same query again and again, SQL generates a plan and saves it. While this is going to be used when you are using the execute SQL command, this will not happen when we are trying to use exec. The reason is, each time exec builds its query plan, each time it is being executed, but here in this case it will simply load the parameters, it will build the plan and load the parameters at the runtime dynamically. That is all it's going to happen. So I would always advise you to use sp_execute SQL for executing your dynamic queries. Apart from that, remember something important is execute SQL. Whenever you try to debug, you would a session, and you otherwise you would realize that it is actually using a different scope. So the scope is not similar or not in line with your stored procedure or the DML batches that you are going to execute as such. So it will be altogether a different session and different scope where your dynamic SQL will be executed. That is why we have to declare and map variables, and anything that you have or any variable that you are going to use in the dynamic SQL should be declared in the scope within the dynamic SQL's statements. So remember that, and I hope this will help you understand and build the basic knowledge about creating and executing dynamic SQL. Thank you, friends.